I was carrying a pot of water from the stove when I heard Lysandra's voice drifting through the crack of the kitchen door. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, like she'd already decided. It's time to put her in a nursing home. The words cut cleaner than any knife in my drawer. For a moment, I thought she was talking to a friend, gossiping the way she does after church. But then I caught the pause, the silence that belonged to my son. Cassian didn't argue. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't defend me. That silence was worse than anything she could have said. My knees trembled, and I steadied myself against the frame. I felt the clay cool against my palm. The adobe wall my husband and I had plastered with our own hands 40 years ago. He was gone now, but I heard his voice as clearly as if he stood beside me. "You are stronger than you like to show, Aurelia." I wanted to push open the door, to confront them then and there, but I swallowed the impulse. Instead, I listened. Lysandra's words spilled steady, practiced how I was taking up space, how Cassian had no courage to decide, how she would arrange everything. My son muttered something, low, defeated. I could picture him, shoulders slumped, eyes down, nodding to keep the peace. When the call ended, chairs scraped and footsteps passed down the hall. I stayed still, my breath shallow, my body pressed against the wood. Only when the house settled into silence again did I step back into my room. The familiar scent of cedar wrapping me. I set the pot aside untouched, sat on the edge of my bed, and opened the drawer I had not touched in years. The drawer gaped open before me. Papers stacked in neat bundles, each one a reminder of what this house once meant. 40 years ago, Joaquin and I signed the deed at a lawyer's office just off the plaza. We walked out into the sun with the keys in my hand and the future in our pocket. He carved saints in a small shed out back, and I taught children to read on St. Michael's Drive. Every adobe brick, every rose bush along the wall carried the weight of our labor. When he died, the house grew quiet in a way I could not bear. Cassian and Lysandra were struggling then, moving from one rental to the next, never steady. Milo was small, and I feared he would feel rootless, so I opened the door. "Stay a few months," I said, "until you get on your feet." At the time, it felt like an act of love, a mother giving what she had to spare. Months turned into years, little by little. The house changed. The television I once used to watch my novellas now blared news or sports I never chose. My kitchen filled with foods I did not buy. Cereal boxes with names I could hardly pronounce. Photographs of their trips pushed aside the black and white portrait of my parents. Even my sewing chair was shifted to make room for Lysandra's decor. Bought in bulk from chain stores with no memory in their weave. I told myself it was only furniture, only noise, only taste, but each concession chipped away at the walls Joaquin and I had built. What had begun as refuge for them became exile for me, all within the same adobe walls. I closed the drawer gently, pressing the papers flat, and felt a slow fire rise in my chest. The house was still mine, even if they had forgotten, and in the days ahead, I would remind them. It wasn't only the words I overheard that betrayed me. The truth had been bleeding through in small drops long before that night. Lysandra's eyes always rolled when I spoke, as though my sentences were chores she endured. When I asked for help with the groceries, her sighs filled the room louder than the bags I carried. Cassian watched it happen, but his silence was the silence of a man too weary or too weak to fight. Meals became battles I never chose. If I cooked beans, she pushed them aside for her organic meals. If I baked bread, she warned Milo about carbohydrates. Even my rosary on the counter was nudged out of place, replaced by her magazines. These weren't accidents, they were signals. Tiny flags planted in soil I had tended for decades. One afternoon, Senora Baca leaned against the low wall that divided our yards. Her face was cautious, but her voice low. Aurelia. Mija, I heard your daughter-in-law asking around about residences. Not for herself. Her eyes met mine, heavy with sympathy. You should be careful. I thanked her, lips pressed tight. Though inside me the quiet anger grew roots, the confirmation came days later. I was clearing the kitchen table after Milo's homework when a glossy packet slipped out from under the placemats. Comfort. Living for seniors, it read, with staged photographs of smiling gray-haired couples in matching cardigans. The pages smelled of Lysandra's perfume. She had thumbed them more than once. I held the brochure in my hand until my knuckles whitened, then slid it into the drawer with the other's deed. Will. Savings. They thought I would never resist, that my silence meant surrender. They had mistaken patience for defeat. That night, before I went to bed, I opened the cedar dresser again and studied the papers waiting inside. The cedar dresser carried the same scent it had the day Joaquin built it. His hands had shaped the panels from reclaimed wood, insisting that strong grain deserved to be preserved. For years it had guarded our linens, my blouses, his carved belts. Now it guarded the truth they had chosen to ignore. I laid the papers out one by one across my quilt. The deed bore my name alone, signed and notarized when we bought the house off Canyon Road. The will, drawn up after Joaquin's heart scare, made it clear that everything passed directly to me. Tax receipts, utilities, mortgage payments, all bearing the handwriting of my steady pen. Every official seal was a witness that I was no guest in this house, but the sole owner. Beneath those papers lay envelopes I had tucked away like seeds in winter. Small deposits from the sale of Joaquin's carvings, Santos, he once displayed in a gallery near Canyon Road. Modest savings from my own teaching years. Pension checks carefully stretched. Birthday money unspent. Not a fortune, but enough to stand on my own feet without asking permission. They assumed my wallet was as worn as my patience. They had no idea. I pulled a spiral notebook from the drawer, its cover faded but unused. On the first page, I wrote 3 words in capital letters. My next steps. The pen moved firmly, not trembling. Item 1, review the deed with Raphael, our old attorney. Item 2, call Nora about current property values. Item 3, inventory, what is truly mine inside this house. Each line steadied me, as if with every word I reclaimed another brick from the walls closing in around me. I closed the dresser gently, as though sealing a pact with myself. The silence of the room no longer pressed down on me. It breathed with me. For the first time in years, I felt Joaquin's strength settle into my bones, reminding me that love was never meant to be confused with surrender. The next morning, I rose earlier than usual, dressed with purpose, and walked down the hall toward the kitchen where the locks and walls still carried my name. The locksmith came on a Tuesday morning, his van pulling into the drive before Cassian or Lysandra stirred. I stood at the doorway with my checkbook already open. The man didn't ask questions when I pointed him to my bedroom. A new lock clicked into place within minutes, the sound crisp and final. When I closed the door and turned the key for the first time, a calm washed over me. It was a small circle of privacy, but it was mine again. That evening, I cooked dinner early, before the house filled with their noise. I made green chili stew in a small pot, enough for myself and Milo, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. When Cassian came home and saw the simmering pot nearly empty, his brow furrowed. "Didn't you make enough for everyone?" he asked. "I made what I needed," I replied evenly, setting aside a bowl for Milo. "There's bread and cold meat in the fridge if you're hungry." He blinked as if the words had come from a stranger. Lysandra entered moments later, eyes narrowing at the sight of my plate already washed and drying by the sink. The next day, I taped a ruled sheet of paper to the refrigerator. Columns marked with groceries bought and who paid for them. At the top, I wrote the date in careful pen. When Lysandra opened the fridge for milk, her eyes landed on the ledger. She pulled it off, studied it, and tacked it back with a stiff smile. "Organizing, are we?" she asked, voice light but sharp at the edges. "Just keeping track," I answered, wiping the counter. Cassian shifted uneasily when he saw the ledger later that night. He lingered by the fridge, fingers grazing the paper but not tearing it down. Milo, however, looked at me with a small spark in his eyes. After Lysandra left the room, he leaned closer. "Good," he whispered. It wasn't rebellion in the loud sense. I had no shouting, no dramatic confrontations, but each act was a line, drawn quietly but firmly. A locked door, a separate pot, a ledger on the fridge. These were my reminders to them and to myself that my life was not theirs to portion out. And when I woke the next morning, I knew the next line I would draw would not be inside these walls at all. The folder of papers weighed heavy in my handbag as I walked into Rafael Cordova's office on East Marzi. He had been our attorney for decades, through wills and mortgages, through Joaquin's final illness. His hair was whiter now, but his voice carried the same measured patience. I spread the documents on his desk, one by one. He read in silence, nodding slowly, tapping the edge of the deed with his pen. "Aurelia," he said at last, "this house is entirely yours. No joint tenancy, no shared ownership. They are guests here, nothing more." The certainty in his tone lifted a weight I had carried for months. I thanked him, tucking the papers back, my heart steadier than when I had arrived. From there, I walked to the rail yard to meet Nora, my niece. She greeted me with her bright grin, iPad in hand, energy always one step ahead. "Tia, your house will fetch a premium. Adobe near Canyon Road, buyers are waiting." She pulled up listings, swiping through photographs of new condos, each one more modern than the last. That afternoon, we toured two. The first was near the rail yard park, with wide windows and a balcony that overlooked the train tracks where vendors set up on Saturdays. The second stood along West Alameda, modest but luminous. A small patio spilling light onto the living room. I walked through each room in silence, touching counters and window frames, letting myself imagine mornings alone, evenings free of sighs and rolling eyes. The spaces were smaller, yes, but uncluttered, full of air and choice. On the ride back, Nora glanced at me. "So, what do you think?" I smiled. The first genuine smile I had felt in weeks. "I think," I said, "that I had forgotten how it feels to imagine something new." That night, when I returned to the old adobe, the walls pressed close again, heavy with voices that were not mine, but the image of light-filled rooms stayed with me, bright enough to guide me toward the next step. By Saturday afternoon, Lysandra's parents arrived from Albuquerque with their well-rehearsed smiles. They settled into my living room as though it belonged to them. Voices gentle but insistent. "Aurelia," her mother began, "at your age, it's natural to want more support. A community would be good for you. Friends your age, meals prepared, no worries." Her father chimed in, "It's really for your own good. Cassian and Lysandra worry about you all the time." I folded my hands in my lap and listened. Their words rolled over me like the monsoon rain that wets the earth but never stays. I answered with small nods, a faint smile, and no promises. When they left, Lysandra's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as though she believed I had finally been softened. The next morning after Mass at the cathedral, two acquaintances approached me in the plaza. "We heard you might be looking at senior residences," one said kindly. "It's wonderful, safe and social," the other added. "Think how relieved your children will be." Their tone was syrupy, but the script was too familiar. I thanked them for their concern and walked on. heart steady. Back home, I brewed coffee and dialed Nora. Her voice answered bright as always. Tia, ready for the next step. Yes, I said firmly. Set the buyer walkthrough. Monday morning, early. There was a pause. Then her tone sharpened with delight. Done. I'll handle the details. They'll be there at 9. After I hung up, I sat by the window with my cup, watching the late sunlight fall across the courtyard. The voices of persuasion still echoed faintly, but they no longer touched me. The decision was mine. And by Monday, it would no longer be words in a notebook, but ink on paper. On Sunday morning, I rose before the rest of the house. I laid out my embroidered mantelcloth, smoothed the creases with both palms, and set the table with the good china that had not seen daylight in years. The scent of red chili simmering with tortillas filled the kitchen, mixing with the aroma of café de olla. For once, I prepared the meal not out of duty, but as a celebration, a farewell. By the time Cassian wandered in, the table was heavy with bowls of chilaquiles, beans, and warm bread. He looked startled, as if he had walked into a stranger's home. Lysandra arrived next, lips pressed thin, glancing around with suspicion. Milo bounded down the hall, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the spread. We ate together, the clinking of forks echoing in the silence. Milo smiled at me between bites, joy spilling across his face as he reached for seconds. Cassian tried to relax, asking questions about the food, but his voice cracked. Lysandra picked at her plate, her irritation barely masked. When the plates were nearly empty, I set down my cup and looked at them steadily. My voice was calm, steady, the voice of a teacher delivering a lesson. Tomorrow morning, I sign the papers. I sold the house. Cassian's fork dropped against his plate, the sound sharp as glass breaking. You! What his face drained of color, panic rushing in. Lysandra pushed back from the table, her chair scraping the floor. You can't just decide this on your own. We live here too. I met her fury with quiet certainty. Guests do not own the house they occupy. For a long moment, no one spoke. Cassian's breathing quickened. Lysandra's fists tightened against the table, and Milo simply leaned back, his smile small but radiant, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. I rose from my chair, gathered the plates, and carried them to the sink. Tomorrow, at 9, the signatures would be inked, and nothing in this house would belong to them again. On Monday morning, I walked into Raphael's office with my papers neatly stacked in my bag. The young couple from Los Alamos was already there, their little girl drawing with crayons on a pad while her parents reviewed the final documents. Their excitement filled the room, and I felt no bitterness, only relief that my house would shelter a family who longed for it. Raphael guided me through each page, his voice steady, his pen pointing to where my signature belonged. With every stroke of ink, I felt another chain fall away. When the final document slid across the desk and I pressed my name down, it was done. The house was no longer mine, but my future was. Word traveled faster than I imagined. By mid-week, Senora Baca stopped me outside Cown's Market, shaking her head. Everyone knows now, Aurelia. They say your daughter-in-law was planning to move you into a home. Now people see who she really is. Her voice carried no judgment toward me, only pity for Cassian and Lysandra. At Mass the following Sunday, Lysandra walked stiffly down the aisle. Chin raised too high, I saw the whispers, the turned heads, the polite smiles that vanished as she passed. Her reputation, so carefully polished, cracked under the weight of what people now believed. Cassian kept close to her side, but his eyes were sunken, his voice flat. I knew they were scrambling for a rental. Milo told me as much when he came to spend the night at my sister's house where I was staying temporarily. They argue all the time, he whispered. But I told Dad I want to be with you more. It feels calmer. I hugged him close, grateful for his honesty. The shame that shadowed his parents did not touch him. In the eyes of the community, their fall was already sealed. While my path was opening toward the light of something new, 2 weeks later, I carried my last box into the condo near the rail yard. The movers set down my sewing machine in the corner. And when the door closed behind them, the silence felt new, not heavy, but clean. I opened the balcony door and let the air flow through, carrying with it the sound of the train yard and the laughter of children at the park below. This was not the adobe I had guarded for 40 years, but it was mine in a way that mattered even more. On the wall above my desk, I framed a copy of the deed transfer. Next to it, I placed one of Joaquin's Santos, carved decades ago with his sure hands. Together, they told the story the past that built me and the decision that set me free. Around my neck, I wore a plain steel key on a chain. It wasn't ornate, not polished, but it was heavy enough to remind me every day that I held the lock and the choice. I met with the director of the senior center off Alta Vista Street and created a modest fund from the sale proceeds, small grants for workshops on dignity and financial awareness. I knew there were other women like me who had given everything only to be treated as burdens. Now they would have tools I never did. Cassian surprised me. With Raphael's guidance and the pressure of losing the house, he began therapy. Milo told me his father seemed quieter, less defensive, though still uncertain. Lysandra, meanwhile, withdrew from her circles. The smiles that once welcomed her at church or on the plaza had turned brittle. Milo flourished in the new rhythm. He spent half his time with his parents, but more evenings with me. Here he could do homework without raised voices, cook simple meals by my side, and sleep in a room that was truly his. He told me once, while watering my balcony plants, "It feels like home here." At night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights glowing across the tracks. Peace settled around me, not given by anyone, not borrowed, but earned. I had unlocked my life again, and this time, I held the only key.